Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Polymega base unit. Now, if you are a video game collector like me, you are well aware of what this thing is, and you have been very interested in it for a long time. I originally got to take a look at this last year at E3, and initially I was skeptical, but after messing around with it for a bit last year, I walked away impressed. And so now I am excited to get this review unit in here and run it through its paces. So what is this thing? Well, it is a standalone clone system that attempts to be everything to everybody. The scope of this project is absolutely insane because the whole concept with this is that you would buy these modules that you can detach and attach to the top there to give you different functionality and support of all these retro consoles. However, the base unit that I have here for review is pretty cool because it comes with a CD slot drive that supports the Sega Saturn, the Sega CD. It also supports the Geo CD as well as the PlayStation 1 and the TurboGrafx-CD all out of the box. And it wants to support all of this with its own interface, its own ecosystem, its own controller, and doing it with very little lag and basically crystal clear HDMI to a modern television. Now, it's important to note that this retails for $400 for the base unit, and then each additional module, when released, I believe will be $80 on top of that. So you can kind of customize what you want to use this for and basically pick and choose the different types of consoles that you are interested in and collect for. So what's going on the inside of this box? Well, in there you have an Intel Coffee Lake S series processor with 2 gigabytes of RAM. It also supports Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. It's an HDMI 2.0 connection. There's gigabit Ethernet, which is kind of an interesting addition there, as well as 2 USB ports. It also comes with onboard storage, so there is 32 gigabytes of flash memory, although when you get it from the factory, it actually has the operating system on it, as well as a bunch of games, and we're going to get into that. So when I booted mine up and installed the latest firmware, I had about 9 gigabytes free. But that's okay, because you can also install your own SSD flash drive in here, so you can basically get it up to several terabytes, which should be more than enough for most gamers. And then it has an 8-speed DVD drive, and in running all of this is a proprietary Linux-based operating system. And then it comes with the console system BIOS already installed on the hard drive, and they've licensed these from third parties. Now, this is huge because you hear about a lot of these clone systems where they would try to ship these to customers, and then the customer is expected to go on the internet and Google and download, the BIOS of the different consoles that they want to play. Well, here you don't have to, that they've actually licensed and basically configured them to run specifically with this. However, when we get into the games, I'll tell you why you might want to go get your own BIOS. At least there's the option for that, and it's a nice thing to have. But again, not having to go out on the internet and configure this thing at all, it's basically just plug and play. In my mind, is actually pretty cool. Now, when they first announced this project years ago, they said they're going to try to accomplish all of this using FPGA. And as you guys know, that's a very solid and compatible way of doing it, but it can also be very expensive. And so since that time, they said they're going to switch over to emulation. That's what this is using right here. And when we get into playing the games, you can see how successful that is. Now let's go ahead and talk about the controller for a second here. So as you can see, it is a custom-made controller specifically for the Polymega. And it really feels very similar to the PlayStation 4 controller, which I think is a very good thing. It's a very light controller. It has a very nice feel to it. As you can see here, it's got a bunch of buttons that you might expect to cover pretty much all of the different consoles that you're going to be playing. It functions as a wireless controller, or you can plug it directly into the Polymega with the provided cable here that will charge it as well as reduce latency. And by the way, latency is a big thing with this console that they wanted to try to avoid as much as possible. They know old school arcade games need to have as little latency as possible, and they've worked really hard to try to minimize that as best as they can. It also supports a bunch of third-party wired and wireless controllers. I messed around with a wired Xbox 360 controller, as well as this Genesis-style 8-button arcade pad from Retrobit. So as you can see, there is a lot going on with the Polymega, but I am ready to put it through its paces. I have a stack of games covering a bunch of different systems here that it supports out of the box. So let's take a look. When you first turn this on, you're brought into a menu system that I think looks pretty nice. I was pleasantly surprised at how this looks, the navigation, the colors, just how quick it is. But I guess that shouldn't be much of a surprise because the people who made the Polymega have a history of shipping AAA titles and also working on other digital marketplaces and interfaces like this. So they're taking all that knowledge of software development and applying it to the interface for the Polymega. One of its coolest features is that you can connect to your Wi-Fi and then download a database of games that it supports and knows about. And it's impressive because I was throwing all sorts of games at it, both North American as well as Japanese and other regions, and it just seemed to recognize all of them. Beyond that, you can go into the details of the game and see a description of it. You can look at screenshots, and then check this out. Down below, it'll tell you things like, oh, this game is similar to these others that you might want to check out, which is really cool if you're looking for new games to play. And depending on the game, it'll give you other information like, oh, well, this developer also created these games, or sometimes it'll tell you like, yeah, these are some other games that were released the same year. So it's a pretty cool interface where you can get information about the game you're playing, but as a gamer, find out about other games you might want to check out. Now, one of the systems that I was most interested in testing with this is the Sega Saturn, because the Sega Saturn is notoriously difficult to get running even on a PC, and they are claiming that you should be able to play pretty much most Sega Saturn games. So let's go ahead and check some out. I'm going to go ahead and put in my copy of Galactic Attack. So you have a couple things that happens here. First, it brings up a nice little graphic on the screen there, and then you have the option to play or manage. Now we're going to go into manage, and in there you can see that you can start installing it to the hard drive. So that is pretty cool because if you do that, you don't have to use the disk anymore. So it basically just rips it straight to the hard drive. That improves the load times. And again, you'll never have to wear out your original disk. Notice when you go to play the game, you're given two options. So the first default one is enhanced mode. And there you basically get the ability to do save states. So you can save and load at any time that you want. Plus you can play the game with fan-made patches and translations. So that is a really cool option if you're a game collector like me, especially for the Sega Saturn, because Sega Saturn games in North America tend to be fairly expensive, but now you can go and get the Japanese version, which might be a little bit cheaper, download a fan-made translation patch, and run it straight off of here, no problem. The other option is to start the game in classic mode, and that's really for people who primarily are maybe competitive gamers. They play it and do speed runs, things like that. Basically, it removes the ability to use any patches or any save states, and it actually does a little banner down in the corner so that your viewers know that that's the version that you're running. And as you can see here, Galactic Attack looks and runs great. It's outputting at 1080p at 60 frames a second. And notice that it's keeping its normal 4:3 aspect ratio. So it does that by default. And since we are playing on the Sega Saturn, I thought it'd be cool to check out the Retrobit 8-button arcade pad. Yeah, connected just fine. Didn't have to install any drivers or anything. It just worked. Now let's go ahead and check out some other Sega Saturn games, including Virtua Racing, as well as Solar Eclipse, as well as one of my favorites, Panzer Dragoon 2. One thing I was a little surprised to see is that it also works with fan-made burned games. So here you see Police Knots for the Sega Saturn, but it has the English patches attached to it. You pop it in and it runs it fine. And then we're going to check out Robotica. Now, this is a fairly common Saturn game, but the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because it highlights something that a lot of game collectors have to deal with, and that is that sometimes your original media could be dirty, could be damaged, and the Polymega just may not even recognize it. And so I ended up having to clean the disc fairly thoroughly to get the Polymega to recognize it. Again, it's not the fault of the Polymega itself, it's just that it's kind of, you know, what you have to deal with when you collect these CD games. But thankfully, it did recognize it, and I was able to install it to the hard drive, so I'll never have to deal with that again. Now let's go ahead and put in some Japanese Saturn games, which in some cases can be cheaper than the North American versions. This is X-Men Children of the Atom here, a fighting game that looks pretty good. And then here is Virtua Fighter Remix, the Japanese version. You just put the disc in, the Polymega recognizes it and runs it just fine. And again, what's cool about this is that you don't have to go out and find the Japanese version of the Saturn BIOS. It's all built in and it just works. And again, some Japanese versions like Snatcher here are way cheaper than the North American versions. North American version of Snatcher is probably hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. It's super expensive, but you can get the Japanese version for way cheaper here. Fan translation, you're good to go. Now let's go ahead and check out some Sega CD games, and it's been really wild to see Sega CD collecting taking off in the last couple years. I think this is going to be of interest for a lot of people because sometimes getting the original hardware, especially working, can be kind of pricey, and it's nice that the Polymega just supports it out of the box. And this, of course, is Sonic CD, and I wanted to show you the save states working. So to do that, you hit the menu button on the controller. It brings that up right there, and then just like every other system that supports this, you can either save or load, and it's basically just instant. Now let's go ahead and check out a Sega CD game called Heimdall, and this is where I ran into a little bit of a hiccup. So put the game in, started it, and it starts playing an FMV intro, and you know, it plays it for about a minute or so, and then all of a sudden it just skips it and goes right to the menu, which I thought was kind of odd. Now the game plays fine, and you can see the gameplay here, but for whatever reason I couldn't get it to play the entire FMV intro, which again is very weird. So I tried installing the game to the hard drive, I tried cleaning my disc, I tried playing in classic mode, which shouldn't really make any difference, but no matter what I could do, I could not get it to play or finish the intro, which I thought was really weird. Well, I finally figured out what the problem is. Now, remember at the beginning of the video where I mentioned that you could go out on the internet and download the official BIOS and use it on here? Well, that's what it was. So it's important to know that this still is somewhat in beta, or they're still taking feedback from people who are doing testing out there and still applying different fixes to different games. And so the BIOS that comes with the Polymega, for whatever reason, has a slight problem with the intro of this game. It's very specific, and frankly, it's really not that big of a deal overall, because how often do you need to watch the intro? I mean, the game plays fine, but what I did was I did put the actual Sega CD BIOS on a thumb drive, and then you just start the game and it works fine. So just be aware that's an option. And again, they're going to be fixing these things as it goes along. The plan for the Polymega is to really do firmware updates for the life of the console. So, you know, as they release new expansions and as they get more feedback from end users and customers, they're going to be applying fixes as they go along. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some PlayStation 1 games, and I have to admit, I went a little nuts here because, well, lately in the last couple weeks, I've been full on playing a ton of PlayStation 1 games, and so I've just been kind of in the mood, both with playing them for videos and testing and reviewing stuff, and so I just had a ton of games that I wanted to check out, and I was just already really familiar with. And I did mix it up quite a bit. I actually had, I think 12 PlayStation 1 games of all different genres to throw at this thing, including a couple of Japanese games just for fun. And yeah, it's the thing about the PlayStation 1, I guess this is kind of a tangent, but man, there are just so many great games for the PlayStation 1 across every genre. It's just so much fun to collect for and play. Like for instance, I'd forgotten about Pandemonium 2. I hadn't played that in years. Or, also Star Wars Rebel Assault 2. I remember that game when it first came out, and it felt like a new, Star Wars movie, and you were the main character of it. It was so killer. By the way, a cool little feature of the controller that you might use a lot when playing PS1 games is that you can enable a kind of faux analog support for that left thumbstick. All you have to do is hold down the clear button and click in on the left thumbstick to enable that analog mode. And what's interesting is that it's actually on the controller itself. So it basically will work across every game, every system, if that's what you prefer. And then you can just do it again to disable it. And so that's pretty handy with these PS1 racing games where it just feels a little bit more natural to do it that way. Speaking with racing games, it's with Destruction Derby 2 that I ran into another issue. So as you can see here, the game starts and then it gets to a loading screen and then just locks up. And again, like Heimdall, I tried to troubleshoot this best I could. I tried installing to the hard drive, cleaning my disk, all that sort of stuff, and it didn't make a difference. And so the solution here was the same as with the Sega CD. You go to the internet, download the official BIOS, put it on a thumbstick in a BIOS directory, and then when you launch the game, it'll automatically detect it, use that, and it runs the game fine. Now, with both of these issues, I did reach out to Polymega and ask them if they were aware of the issues going on, and they said yes. So again, they're taking all of this feedback and applying it to the system, to the firmware, and they're going to update them as it goes along. I also want to show Mega Man 8 Anniversary Edition for the PS1 because I know some of you do care about the different video modes. So by default, it just outputs to, glorious HDMI. But if you want to go in there and choose something that looks a little bit more like an old school CRT, you can. You see the examples here. Personally, I'm not a fan of this at all. Notice at the top, you can adjust them to your liking. And again, if this is your thing, then you can have at it. Now let's go ahead and check out some Geo CD games. I don't have a ton of them. I just have probably about half a dozen or so, and most of them are fighting games as you see here. So the first thing I immediately noticed when popping these discs in there was just how incredibly quick they loaded. I was almost kind of surprised at how quickly these games loaded. It was pretty cool. By the way, another thing that's interesting about the Polymega is that when you put a disc in, it automatically starts installing it to the hard drive, whether you want it to or not. And the reason why it's doing that, I assume, is because it's trying to just cache it and get the best performance possible. Now, you do have an option to permanently install it, add it to your collection, but if you don't want to, you pop out the disk and it just deletes it. So again, it's kind of interesting that it does this, and it doesn't affect gameplay at all. You can launch the game and it's actually just installing in the background. The final system that the Polymega base unit supports without any additional modules is the TurboGrafx-CD, but unfortunately I don't have any of those games to show, so we're just gonna have to assume that they're okay, but maybe in the future I can test them. So let's go ahead and go back to the main menu, and one of the things I was surprised to see was just how many pre-installed games come with the base unit. And as you can see here, it's a mix of a bunch of games across many different consoles, including the NES, Super NES, the Genesis, even the PlayStation 1. There's a couple games for that, including Viper. Check this game out. Actually, this looks pretty cool. I was playing for quite a while capturing the footage here. Another game here, platformer called 40 Winks. Again, pretty good. I mean, I was enjoying this. This is cool. Here's a Sega Genesis shooter from Pico Interactive called Battle Squadron. Again, another game that was a lot of fun. It was nice to be able to use the analog thumbstick for this one too. Found it to be very natural. I also got sucked into this platformer called Doodle World. Again, not great graphics, but man, it's got it where it counts, and that is really tight controls. So this is another cool game that's just included. as well as a 2D side-scrolling brawler for the Super Nintendo. I guess this is the PAL version that Pico Interactive is bringing to this, but yeah, it's called Legend. Yeah, looks great, has awesome graphics. So what are my final thoughts? Well, as you can see, I'm actually really happy with it. I think what it brings is something that is pretty cool and unique, and frankly, just plug and play for a lot of people. If you already have the games and you just want a console, you know, in your entertainment center that you can just put discs in and just go and just play games, not have to configure them or any of that sort of stuff, I think this is going to be a good system for you. However, at $400, it is not cheap. I mean, we're getting into PlayStation 4 and Xbox territory there. But, you know, to be fair, this does play thousands and thousands of games. And as you buy modules for it, it's going to add thousands and thousands more games to it. So it's important to remember that this is just the base unit. Polymega has announced that they're going to release a bunch of different modules over the coming months and potentially years, including one that's going to support cartridges for the original NES, Super NES, Genesis, 32X, the PC Engine, and potentially even more. They talk on their website about Atari and all sorts of other stuff, so who knows? But I do know that many of you are sitting there going, hey, I've already got a rockin' PC in my game room. I've already got the ROMs, the emulators, the BIOS. I already got that going on. What does this bring? And frankly, probably not much, really. I mean, the interface is awesome, and it's certainly pretty cool. It'll be interesting to see what they do going forward with the digital downloads and the purchases and things like that. The ability to run the patches is awesome, but you can do a lot of that on the PC already. So again, I think this is for a game collector who has a physical game collection or wants to build one up. They just want a plug and play system. They don't want to futz around with Windows or downloading stuff off the internet. They just want to put it in their entertainment center, put a game in and play it. Overall, I think it's pretty cool. It does what it set out to do. And again, some of the things like the interface really ended up just impressing me. I love all the additional information that you get. That really speaks to the collector in me and wanting to find new games, new hidden gems out there. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Something tells me you are going to have a lot of opinions on this, and I can't wait to read them down in the comments below. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.